The Whitmore family Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be warm and peaceful. The table was full of food, soft laughter, and family members catching up after a long time. Ava sat quietly, trying to enjoy the moment, but something felt strange about her father, Daniel Whitmore. He was unusually tense and kept avoiding eye contact. Suddenly, Daniel stood up from his chair. The room went completely silent. Every fork stopped mid-air. He looked at everyone and then pointed directly at Ava. In a cold voice, he said she was not his biological daughter. At first, people thought it was a bad joke or some kind of misunderstanding, but Daniel did not take it back. Instead, he said he had been living with doubt for many years and could no longer stay silent. Ava felt like the ground disappeared under her feet. Her heart started racing, and her hands began to shake. She looked at her mother, Claire, hoping she would say something, but Claire just sat there quietly, avoiding her eyes. That silence hurt even more than Daniel's words. Everyone at the table started whispering, unsure what to believe. Ava's face turned red with embarrassment and shock. She could not understand how her whole life could suddenly be questioned in one moment. While everyone was distracted, her eyes caught something strange. Her late grandmother's old wooden box, which was usually kept hidden, was being placed in the center of the room. It looked like someone wanted it to be opened right now. Daniel noticed it too, and his expression changed immediately. For the first time, he looked nervous. It was clear that the box meant something important, something he did not want revealed. Ava felt a strange pull toward it, as if the truth of her life was locked inside that box, waiting to come out. No one at the table spoke for a while after Daniel's accusation. The air felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for something else to happen. Ava kept looking at her father, hoping he would explain himself properly, but he didn't. Instead, he slowly sat back down and said in a lower voice that someone had made him doubt the truth a long time ago. He didn't say who, and he didn't explain how. That made everything even worse. People around the table started whispering again. Some guests looked uncomfortable, while others seemed unsure whether to believe Daniel or feel sorry for Ava. The family felt like it was breaking into small pieces right in front of everyone. Ava could feel eyes on her, but she couldn't think clearly. Her mind kept repeating his words again and again. She suddenly remembered her grandmother Eleanor. She had always been strict about one thing in the house. There was an old wooden box that no one was ever allowed to touch. As a child, Ava once tried to open it, but her grandmother stopped her immediately and told her it was not for anyone else. At the time, Ava didn't understand why it mattered so much. Now, standing in this tense silence, that memory felt different. It didn't feel like a simple family rule anymore. It felt like a warning she had ignored for years. Ava looked toward the corner of the room where the box was usually kept, even though she knew it wasn't there anymore. The idea of it suddenly made her feel calm in a strange way, as if it was the only thing in the room that still made sense. Around her, the family was starting to split without saying it openly. A few relatives quietly defended Daniel, saying he wouldn't say something like this without reason. Others shook their heads, thinking he had lost control of his thoughts. No one could agree on what was real anymore. Ava felt like her whole past was being questioned in her mind. Even small childhood memories now felt uncertain, like they could have a hidden meaning she never noticed before. Everything felt unstable, except one thing. That old box in her memory stayed the same, unchanged and locked, like it was waiting for her to finally understand why it had always been protected so carefully. Claire finally stood up after a long silence. Her hands were shaking as she walked toward the cabinet where the old wooden box had been kept for years. She didn't look at anyone while doing it. It felt like she had already lost control of the situation. Slowly, she placed the box on the dining table in front of Ava and said she could open it if she wanted. Her voice was low, almost broken, as if she hoped this would stop everything from getting worse. Ava hesitated for a moment, then lifted the lid. The room went quiet again. Inside, everything was arranged too carefully, almost like someone had prepared it for this exact moment. There were thin folders stacked neatly, each one labeled with different years of her childhood. Some had hospital names written on them, others had dates she didn't immediately recognize. She pulled out the first folder and opened it slowly. Inside were papers from when she was born, but something felt off. The details didn't match what she had been told her entire life. The name of the hospital looked slightly different, and one of the dates seemed corrected by hand. Ava felt a cold wave move through her chest as she kept reading. Daniel suddenly leaned forward and grabbed the edge of the table. His face changed as he saw the documents. He shook his head and said loudly that none of it was real. He claimed someone had changed the papers on purpose, someone obsessed with controlling the family. His voice grew sharper, and for the first time, he looked more angry than confident. Ava looked at him, then back at the box. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The documents didn't feel like normal lies, they felt planned, like every page had been placed there with intention. Each paper seemed to push her further away from the life she thought she knew. Claire stayed silent, looking down at her hands. No one else spoke. The room felt tight, like it was closing in. Ava slowly realized this was not just about a broken family argument anymore. It felt deeper, more carefully built, like someone had been shaping confusion for a long time. Ava's hands were still shaking as she reached the bottom of the box. Under the folders, she found a sealed envelope with her grandmother Eleanor's handwriting on it. It was old, slightly yellow, and carefully folded as if it had been hidden for a long time. Claire noticed it and turned pale, but she didn't stop Ava. Ava opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written in uneven lines, as if Eleanor had been writing under stress. The words were clear but heavy. Eleanor wrote that she had started noticing something strange years ago. Daniel had begun to change his beliefs about Ava's birth without any clear reason. At first, she thought it was confusion, but then she realized someone had been feeding him small pieces of false information over time. The letter mentioned corrections in documents. Not just once, but multiple times. Hospital records that didn't match earlier copies, legal forms that had small but important changes, and details that slowly shifted over the years. Eleanor wrote that these changes were not random mistakes. They looked planned, as if someone was carefully adjusting the truth bit by bit so it would go unnoticed. Ava felt her chest tighten as she read further. The letter suggested that her identity had not been changed in one moment, but slowly rewritten through paperwork and repeated lies. It made her feel like her whole life had been built on something unstable, something quietly shaped in the background. Daniel suddenly spoke again, his voice firm but defensive. He said he had been shown proof years ago by someone he trusted completely. He repeated that he never made this up on his own. He looked around the table, as if searching for support, but no one answered him. Ava looked up at him differently now. It was no longer just anger or confusion. It was something deeper. She started to understand that Daniel might not be the source of the lie, but someone who had been guided into believing it. That thought made everything more complicated. The room felt colder than before. Even the silence had weight. Ava realized this wasn't just a family misunderstanding anymore. Someone inside their own circle had been quietly shaping what everyone believed for years, and no one had noticed until now. She sat on the edge of the chair, still holding the papers, but her thoughts were no longer staying in the present. Everything around her started pulling her backward, as if her mind was trying to rebuild her past from a different angle. Small memories that once felt normal now seemed uncertain. Hospital visits from childhood, the way certain conversations were always avoided, even family stories that used to feel familiar, everything started to feel slightly misaligned, like details had been quietly shifted over time. It wasn't something obvious. Nothing she could clearly prove from memory alone. But that slightly off feeling kept growing stronger, making her question things she had never doubted before. Even old mental images of family moments didn't feel stable anymore, as if they had been edited without her noticing. Another folder was opened from the box. Inside were financial documents, and her name appeared on several records. What made it more disturbing was that there was no explanation for these transactions. Some of them were made when she was far too young to understand anything about money. The pattern of dates and approvals suggested someone had been managing her identity in practical ways, not just emotionally or verbally. Across the table, the woman who had been silent for most of the time finally broke down. Her voice shook as she admitted she had noticed changes years ago, but never fully understood them. She explained that there were private conversations Daniel had with someone outside the immediate family, conversations that started off sounding harmless but slowly changed how he viewed everything about the child. At first, it seemed like concern or advice, but later it became certainty, even when there was no clear proof. She said she ignored it at the time, hoping it was just stress or confusion, because confronting it would have meant tearing the family apart. But now it was clear those moments were not random. They had slowly influenced his thinking until doubt turned into belief. As all of this settled in, the realization became heavier. It wasn't just a mistake or misunderstanding that grew over time. It felt like something carefully built step by step, shaping memories, records, and trust until the truth itself became hard to recognize. At the bottom of the box, there was a small audio recorder wrapped in cloth. It looked old, like it had been kept hidden on purpose. Everyone at the table went silent as it was placed in the middle. No one moved. Even breathing felt heavy in the room. She pressed play. Eleanor's voice came out, weak but clear, as if she had recorded it when she already knew things were falling apart. She spoke carefully, saying there was something she could no longer ignore. According to her, Daniel had not come to his belief alone. Someone close to him had been shaping his thoughts for years. The voice explained it slowly. Not in a single moment, not with one big lie, but through small, repeated doubts. Little comments about hospital records, small concerns about timing, and carefully selected information that always pointed in the same direction. Nothing obvious. Nothing that could be easily questioned. Just enough to make doubt grow inside him. As the recording continued, it became clear that this influence was not random. It was patient and planned. Each conversation built on the last, slowly pushing him toward a belief that felt like his own idea. Over time, the doubt turned into certainty, even without solid proof. The person speaking in the recording warned that this kind of control was dangerous because it didn't feel like control at all. It felt like truth forming naturally in someone's mind. The words hit hard. The man who had made the accusation earlier was now sitting very still, his face tight, like something inside him was cracking. For the first time, his confidence didn't look stable. He stared at the table, then at the papers, then away again, as if trying to hold on to what he believed but failing to find a grip. The silence grew heavier. But what made it worse was the feeling that this influence did not end in the past. According to the recording, the source of those planted doubts had always stayed close, quietly watching everything develop, never stepping away. And now, that same presence was still in the room, listening to every word without saying a thing. The recording ended, but no one moved for a long time. The room felt tighter, like the walls had come closer. Then suddenly, voices started rising. It wasn't calm anymore. People began speaking at the same time, trying to defend themselves, trying to explain things no one had fully understood before. Accusations spread across the table. One relative said they were never involved. Another insisted they only repeated what they were told. But every explanation sounded weak, like pieces of a story that didn't fit together anymore. The situation that once looked like a single misunderstanding now felt like something built from many small actions. She stood up, her voice shaking but firm, asking simple questions. Who first started talking about doubts? Who repeated those concerns later? Why did no one stop it when things started feeling wrong? As she asked, people avoided eye contact. No one had clear answers. Instead, there was hesitation, confusion, and shifting blame. Across the table, silence broke again as the woman who had stayed quiet for most of the day finally spoke. She admitted she stayed silent because she was afraid of destroying the family. She said she saw tension building years ago but chose not to speak, hoping it would pass on its own. Her words made the room heavier. Silence in that moment didn't feel innocent anymore. It felt like part of the problem. Then he spoke again, but his voice was different now. The certainty that had been there earlier was fading. He said he started remembering small moments differently. At first, he thought they were his own conclusions, but now he wasn't so sure. He described conversations where doubts were not challenged, only quietly supported. Each memory sounded less like truth and more like something gently shaped over time. The realization spread slowly. It wasn't one person telling a lie from the start. It was many people repeating small ideas, not realizing how they were building something bigger and more dangerous. Each comment, each silence, each agreement added another layer. By the end, what stood in front of everyone wasn't just a broken family argument. It was a pattern of influence spread across years, where belief had been shaped step by step until no one could tell where the truth had actually begun. Inside the box, there was one last panel that didn't open easily. It was thinner than the rest, almost hidden. After a moment of searching, it finally lifted, revealing a sealed envelope and a set of folded papers underneath. Everything in the room went quiet again as it was pulled out. The papers were medical reports, but they looked different from the earlier ones. These were DNA test results. At first glance, they seemed to confirm everything Daniel had been saying. But when she read carefully, something felt wrong. There were two sets of results. The first set showed a clear biological match. The second set, dated later, showed a different conclusion. The strange part was not just the difference, but the notes attached. Small markings in the margins suggested the second report had been altered after the original confirmation. Dates were adjusted. Signatures looked copied. It was not a natural mistake. It looked changed on purpose. She held the papers tighter as her eyes moved to the letter inside the envelope. It was the last writing from Eleanor. The handwriting was weaker than before, as if it had been written when she was running out of time. The letter said clearly that there had never been any real doubt about the biological truth. The problem was not identity, but interference. According to the letter, medical records had been quietly replaced over time. Information had been reshaped step by step so that confusion would grow naturally. Nothing was changed all at once. It was done slowly, carefully, so it would never feel suspicious in the moment. The goal was to make doubt feel like it came from personal belief, not outside influence. As the words sank in, the man who had started all of this earlier went completely still. His hands were shaking now. The confidence he had carried before was gone. He stared at the papers, then at the box, as if trying to understand how he had believed something so strongly without realizing how it formed. His breathing became uneven. He said nothing for a long time, then finally admitted in a low voice that everything had felt real to him, even when he couldn't explain why. It wasn't anger anymore. It was shock. She stood there quietly, looking at everything in front of her. The confusion that had followed her through the day started to clear, replaced by something sharper and colder. This was not random misunderstanding or family conflict. It was controlled distortion, built over years with careful steps, designed so the truth would always feel uncertain until it was too late to recognize it. The room stayed frozen after the last papers were read, but her mind was no longer scattered. Everything she had seen, heard, and discovered started connecting in a straight line. Small details that once felt random now formed a clear pattern. Every doubt, every corrected document, every repeated story pointed in one direction. She looked around the table slowly. The same people who had spoken earlier now avoided her eyes. But she wasn't confused anymore. She was watching differently, noticing who reacted too quickly, who stayed too calm, and who kept changing their expressions at the wrong moments. One person stood out. Not because of noise or anger, but because of control. That person had always been close during important family moments. Present during private conversations. Always involved when doubts were discussed, but never directly responsible for starting them. Always just adding thoughts or sharing concerns at the right time. Now those small actions looked very different. The way doubts were gently supported instead of challenged. The way information always seemed to move in one direction. The way certain ideas were repeated until they felt natural. It was not loud control. It was quiet influence that worked over years. Her voice finally broke the silence. She didn't shout. She simply asked one question that made the air feel heavier. Why did every path of doubt always circle back to the same place? Why did every document change, every memory shift, and every conversation point in a single direction? No one answered immediately. The room felt like it had stopped breathing. The man who had been certain earlier now looked uncertain again, but not because of confusion this time. It was because he was beginning to see how easily his thoughts had been shaped without his awareness. The realization spread slowly across the table. The goal was never to find truth. It was to control what everyone believed. To decide who was trusted, who was doubted, and who would carry the blame when things broke apart. Behind it all was not emotion or misunderstanding, but long-term control over family decisions and hidden advantages that came with it. At that moment, the person who had guided so many conversations understood something had changed. The silence in the room was no longer confusion. It was awareness. And for the first time, every eye slowly shifted, not in chaos, but in recognition. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue or rush. Instead, she slowly placed every document on the table in a straight line, one after another. Each paper was arranged carefully, like pieces of a story that had finally been understood in full. No one interrupted her. Even breathing sounded controlled in the room. She started from the earliest record and moved forward step by step. The first hospital paper, then the corrected version, then the financial documents, then the letter, then the final DNA reports. Each one was explained briefly, not with emotion, but with calm clarity. There was no anger in her tone, only certainty built from everything she had read and seen. As she spoke, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The changes were not random. The doubts were not sudden. Every shift had been guided slowly over time, leading to a belief that never truly belonged to him. The realization hit him in stages. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a quiet understanding that he had been led into something without ever seeing the full picture. His hand shook slightly as he looked at the papers again. This time, he didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. It was as if each document removed another layer of certainty he had held on to for years. The strength in his voice earlier was gone, replaced by silence and regret he couldn't express properly. Across the table, the person who had influenced everything tried to speak. A few words came out, weak and defensive, but they didn't match the evidence in front of everyone. Every attempt to explain fell apart as soon as it was compared to what was now visible. The story that had been built over years was collapsing in real time. No one at the table knew where to look anymore. Some looked down, others away. The atmosphere no longer felt like a family dinner or even a confrontation. It felt like everything hidden had finally been pulled into light at once. She stepped back from the table. There was no need to say anything more. The truth had already spoken for itself. She didn't ask for apologies, and she didn't wait for answers. Turning away, she left the room quietly, carrying nothing but clarity, while behind her, the silence stayed heavy and